Republican Senator Bob Corker will lead the confirmation hearings for Secretary of State nominee Mike Pompeo. Corker is the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and will retire after 11 years on Capitol Hill.
He spoke with Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan about the potential talks between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong Un.
Do you think the president should sit down with Kim Jong Un?
I think it's fine. It's going to happen.
You do believe that meeting's going to happen?
I think ultimately it happens. I do. And I think that that's the way the president likes to deal with things. And I think that what you're going to see is people who have a lot of institutional knowledge prepping for the meeting. You've seen the administration sort of move away from an instant meeting. They've said that, they don't know exactly when it's going to occur. And
so
I think
maybe not May, which is when the
Well, I think you're seeing that happen because the realities of what you have to do in preparation to make sure that it's successful. It takes a while for that to occur. And we do have back channels ourselves, by the way, to North Korea. And, we have our ways of setting things like that up in an appropriate manner.
So let's bring in Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan. Margaret, Corker mentioned back channels with North Korea are already in place. So what more can you tell us about preparations for that meeting?
Well, he's gesturing there not only to those established diplomatic channels we have through the United Nations, but also seemed to be hinting that there may be something more covert in terms of actual contact through agencies other than the State Department, which is interesting because it is suggesting that there is groundwork being laid, though we haven't heard much about it. I thought it was also key to hear from Corker, who runs the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and thus has oversight of the State Department, that he believes that the meeting won't happen in May between Kim Jong Un and President Donald Trump, but rather that they will need more time to lay the kind of groundwork for that summit to take place.
Margaret, we all watched Secretary Tillerson delivering that speech to members of the press a few days ago, and he sounded, for a lot of people, shaken. Corker has spoken with Secretary Tillerson since his firing. What can you tell us about what they discussed?
Well, that's true. And the outgoing Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, hadn't slept much before he gave that 2 p.m. address. He had landed at 4 o'clock in the morning back in Washington after doing this week-long jaunt throughout Africa. And he had already said he'd been woken up a number of times throughout the week in the middle of the night to be told that the president wants to talk to Kim Jong Un. Then he was woken up in the middle of the night by John Kelly to say, you're on thin ice here, your job might be in jeopardy. And then he lands back in Washington, and within 4 to 5 hours, this tweet goes out there firing him. And so Rex Tillerson, when he took that podium at the State Department, was shaken for a number of reasons. Bob Corker, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee chairman, is one of his few allies in Washington. And he said, now, after all of this has happened, he thinks that Rex Tillerson is at peace, that he thinks his legacy will be having gotten us to this point with North Korea, given that it was the Secretary of State who put together and really pushed that campaign, as they call it, of maximum pressure to really squeeze North Korea's fuel imports and coal and really cripple them further with sanctions to get to the point of being able to talk. So he thought that this clash, it was ongoing. Rex Tillerson told him he had planned to stay another year on the job. But it had been a rough one for him, and he knew it, not only because he disagreed with the president on policy, on a number of issues, but also personality-wise. As the CEO of ExxonMobil, he was very deliberate. He was very cautious. He liked to plan things ahead, and that just really didn't mesh with the president's own management style.
So, Margaret, now Mike Pompeo is going to pick up this challenge once he's confirmed as Secretary of State. What are his priorities for the State Department going to be?
Well, that's what we're waiting to hear at those confirmation hearings, which Senator Corker just wouldn't be pinned down on, other than saying they'll be happening in April, which isn't quick enough for many who would like to see that job filled as soon as possible, given the number of pressing issues out there. But Mike Pompeo has been in this role of CIA director, giving analysis to the president, but hasn't had to give policy recommendations. This is going to be a very different role for him, and it's one that often puts the Secretary of State in a challenging position position with the president, no matter who it was. John Kerry had this issue with President Obama. Rex Tillerson had this issue with Donald Trump. Sometimes you have to tell the president a menu of options that he may not like in terms of challenging his fundamental beliefs. You saw that with President Obama in Syria, with his Secretary of State just totally disagreeing with the policy he took on. So it's going to be interesting to see now Mike Pompeo in this role of perhaps having to challenge the president. We don't know yet where that might happen. We know they do seem to be in sync on this Iran nuclear deal. It does not look good for the fate of that international agreement. Mike Pompeo has been a big skeptic. We know in mid-May they have to sign off on whether or not to renew the sanctions or to waive the sanctions on Iran, which could pull the U.S. out of that international agreement. And that's really interesting because that would be happening at the exact same time we're talking about starting talks with North Korea to freeze its nuclear program. So there are some concerns there could be some domino effect there.
Finally, Margaret, the President of the United States has suggested that only he could be the one to sit down with North Korean dictator Kim Jong Un. Not sure that it's clear to him that any president could have made that call, but chose not to for very specific reasons, including one, obviously, that that dictator would think it's a big deal for him. What did Corker say about this meeting with the North Korean dictator?
Well, because of course Senate Foreign Relations has oversight of the State Department, the chairman, Bob Corker, was saying, you know, when it comes to policy, he had been very close to Rex Tillerson. He had been very encouraging of that pressured approach to buckle North Korea under the weight of financial sanctions to get them to talk. However, that involved having the Secretary of State sort of run point and hand off to the president. This other approach, Senator Corker said basically, you know, this is the way it is going to go, but he doesn't think the timeline is going to be as quick as what South Korea has said. He doesn't think the meeting will happen in May. He thinks it's going to take much longer than that to lay the groundwork, although he did suggest some of that has been already laid through back channels.
All right, Margaret Brennan for us. Thank you, Margaret. We appreciate it. And you can watch more of Margaret's interview with Senator Bob Corker on Face the Nation this Sunday. Margaret also speaks with South Korean's foreign minister about potential talks with North Korea and with Senators Rand Paul of Kentucky and Angus King of Maine.